Boss fight catches a shooting star. Here's your look at the new boss fight studio, The Little Prince, with Special Rose and Friend Fox. If someone loves a flower, of just one single blossom grows in all the millions and millions of stars, it is enough to make him happy just to look at the stars. He can say to himself, somewhere my flower is there. For me, you're only a little boy, just like 100,000 other little boys. And I have no need of you, and you have no need of me either. For you, I am only a fox like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, we'll need each other. You'll be the only boy in the world for me, and I'll be the only fox in the world for you. Before starting this review, I'd like to thank the folks over at Boss Fight Studio that kindly provided this sample of Little Prince that we could have a look at for this video. Maybe not as an adult now, but as a child I'd follow the adventures of the Little Prince both in the pages of the books I would borrow from my local library, as well as the adventures he'd have in an animated series I would watch daily. Of this character's depiction, he's actually based on the original novelization design, which dates as far back as 1943. Of the accessories that come along with the Little Prince for his journey, of course, he comes included with a display stand. I'm glad to see as well, if you're going to be basing a figure on the Little Prince, then yes, incorporate the moon to a display stand. And I'm really glad to see that they did that. You may notice this carved-in circle with an inner circle. We'll talk more about that in a second. But it's a very elaborate-looking display stand, but you will not see a lot of color. Nor will you actually really see a lot of color on the accessories or on the Little Prince. Again, they've kept it really soft and subtle on the paint, keeping it more closer to the way he looks from those original books. I'm glad to see that they did that. Of the rocks and all of the little pebbles and stuff, there's even a little volcano at the back of the display stand. You may notice a rather uniquely shaped circle right there. That's actually the peg that's going to fit on the underside of his feet. Simply just take the figure, flip it up, and on the inside, underside, you'll see that there's a couple of peg holes. Simply just take one of those and attach it to the peg. And that's more than enough, almost enough, to keep the display stand levitating. I'm not going to do that, though. We're going to put the figure down instead. And going back to those little indentations there in the display stand, of course, you have the outer circle, but the inner circle is the thing that we're going to talk about first. Of his first accessories, not counting the display stand, he comes included with a special rose. The rose is very simple, very nicely painted as well, with basic green on the main stem, and the actual petals done nicely in a very bright, vibrant red. I can't recall if the novelization actually had a little face, a little body on the inside of the flower. But I certainly remember from the animated series, there was actually a little person's face, a little flower's face on the inside of those petals. Maybe those petals have to peel away before we see it. Very nice looking flower. But you're going to take the bottom of the petal, the bottom of the flower, and on the bottom of the stem, there's a peg. And that's going to be the thing that fits into that middle circle here. Now, when you're attaching it, you really don't have to apply much pressure at all. Be careful that you're not going to squish the leaves, and you really don't want to take the top of the flower and push it in by that, just in case you bend the stem by mistake. If you have it a little bit closer to where the peg is, again, very little pressure has to be applied, and then the flower roots itself into the display stand. And it's not going to be going anywhere either. To protect the flower, and of course to finish off the look, you'll notice that there's that outer circle. It comes also included with the dome. And the dome very carefully fits over top of the flower and lodges itself into that little canal. And you've got yourself a finished presentation for the flower. Really like the way that the special rose turned out. We're going to put this to the side for right now. And the one other accessory to come included with the Little Prince is the Friend Fox. The Friend Fox is in a permanent lying position, which works best for either displaying on a display stand or even in the arms of the Little Prince. And while the paint is very limited on this, kept only just to this caramel brown, the sculpting on this is fantastic. It looks like it was pulled from the pages of the Little Prince books. The very long notable ears, single dots of black for the eyes on either side with a smaller dot in the middle for its nose. It's a really nice little Friend Fox. And again, because it's in a permanent lying position flat on the bottom like this, you can take the display stand once again, picking it up. You can either have like the Friend Fox kind of in the front of it and then have, of course, in the background standing the Little Prince. Or the other thing you can also do as well, put the display stand down, pick up the figure, and bend the arms just ever so slightly. You can take the Friend Fox and actually have it sitting in the little prince's arms. And there really isn't a designated way to do this. You're basically just going to want to bring the arms forward enough that basically the little fox can rest in the arms of the little prince. I kind of like the way that looks as well. Getting a closer look now at the little prince, starting first with his head sculpt. First of all, I want to tell you guys that the studio lights are making his hair look a lot shinier than what it actually is. In person, the yellow actually comes across more like a matte color and not as shiny as maybe what it looks like right now. One of the things I certainly want to commend Boss Fight for with the approach of this figure is a very subtle way that they've painted the figure. You won't find a lot of dark shadowing, nor you'll find actually additional washes anywhere on the figure's body. They kept it very minimal, and it actually adds to the charming factor of this figure. Like, I find it's very alluring to this character because he doesn't have a lot of extra paint. He feels almost like a vintage figure, if that makes any sense at all. We'll start first again with his face. Now, he does have the larger circles of almost a very dark, it doesn't quite look like black, it comes across more like a darker brown. And then he does have the pupils done here in white. I always wondered if those were pupils or if those were reflections of light, but actually in the books, they come across more like almost complete oval shapes. I'm glad they actually painted the eyes with just a little bit of that circle of white in the far corner. Again, like, the softer approach of color really works well to this figure, especially when you look at the lighter coloring of his face, for example. He's got just shy of those little bit of areas of red in his cheeks, a very pale complexion. It's not to the point where you can't see his nose or his mouth. They aren't lost necessarily, and nor are they really painted either. I think other companies may have approached this figure feeling the need to draw lines in there where his mouth would be, or draw that one line where his nose would be indicated. But they kind of just let the mold speak for itself. And that's, again, one of the alluring qualities I think of this figure. Really happy with his head sculpt. Now, of course, when we look at the rest of the body, he does have the scarf. I suppose you could, in theory, take the head sculpt off the ball peg, but it's a very large ball joint you can probably see on the inside there. And then from there, it does look like the scarf is a separate piece. But I really don't feel like I would want to remove it. For starters, he's known for having the scarf in many of the cases. And again, if you're going to be removing the scarf, you're going to be noticing more of a very bare-looking neck. So I'm going to keep it in place for right now. The sculpting of the scarf is nice. It almost has like a woven texturing to it. And again, I almost feel like the studio lights are giving more of a reflection to it than what is actually there. This mint-colored green works very, very well. It's actually very similar to the kind of color he has in the books themselves. Shorter sleeves here. He doesn't actually have articulation, which I almost thought he would have had at the tops where the sleeves attach to the rest of his arms, but it doesn't seem to be the case. He's got some nice wrinkles there, both in the sleeves and the front of his torso. A very bright, vibrant red there on the front of his belt. And as it continues on, he's got these larger, almost bell-bottom pants. Again, I really like these wrinkles that they put into the body. I really would hate to sound like a broken record, but again, one of the things I really like about this figure is that they didn't feel the need to add extra paint. Paint, I think, would have really ruined this figure. Keeping it to the basic core colors, I think, is really where Little Prince here sells as a figure, really soars well as a figure. For the figure's articulation, the head rotates all the way around. Yes, under certain circumstances, if you have the head tilted back like this, you can kind of see the open area of the bottom of his head. But it's unavoidable, and it just allows him to get much more of a range of motion. So if you want to have him looking up to the stars, you can do that. You can have him looking down at the special rows, bending it back and forth for the head, and you can also rotate it all the way around. As for the arms can bring out a full 90-degree angle bend. I'm just going to stop myself for a second before we get to the rest of the articulation on the figure and actually commend also the type of plastic that they're using. It's kind of a hard plastic to describe. It's not hard necessarily. It has, if almost you can see it from the fingers here, it's a slightly more softer plastic, but it feels like a very durable plastic too, especially when it comes to his joints. Like, the joints feel nice and tight. I don't feel like I'm going to have any real problems with them. The arms rotate all the way around. And again, I would have thought he would have had a swivel right here, but he doesn't. It's only, I guess, just attached to it by probably a peg, but it seems too tight to actually be able to move. He does have, however, a hinge joint in the elbow, which also serves to allow the arms to rotate back and forth. Something that you may also notice with the Little Prince when looking at his wrists is that they didn't actually give him wrist articulation. And I got to feel like that was intentional, because if you had looked at the sleeve and the arm, of course, you've got that little cut right there where already has the elbow bend. I feel like they wanted to keep this nice and clean and consistent where the hand is actually still attached to the forearm. putting in, yes, the joint would have allowed the wrist to rotate, but I also feel you can get just as much going for the elbow. The elbow will do just as much as what the wrist would have done, and it would have also broken up the nice sculpting here by putting a big, obvious peg right there. So in this case, I'm actually glad that they didn't put an articulation point right there. It makes it look for a more seamless looking arm. Looking at the rest of the articulation, the upper torso is on a ball joint, so it can rotate all the way around. As for the legs split out, and you can see there's the ball pegs on the inside there. The legs allow to go forward and can also go back. The only thing that's really tight on this figure is the backs of his legs, these hinge joints right here. There seems to be a little bit of extra paint down at the bottom of it, and I've also noticed that they're really tight to move. I can free them up. I can free actually this one a little bit easier than the other one. I may actually just take a hairdryer and just run it a few passes on the back of it just to soften that up. Again, I can get this leg to bend, which would be just, again, the same on this side. But this leg, I'm having a little more of a difficult time. Going to have to take a hairdryer to that. And last, and certainly not least, the little prince does have the feet that rotate back and forth. He does have an ankle pivot, which is a little harder to kind of get in there. And he also can move him back and forth too. And there's the little prince. Let's go ahead and put him back on the display. We'll bring over, speaking of displays, we'll bring over the display stand with the friend fox and the special rose so you can see what they look like on display. And again, you can either have him attached on top of the display stand, more than enough clearance to have him displayed with all of his friends, or you can have him displayed along next to it as well. I'm really happy with this one. Genuinely, I am really happy. The coloring, again, is one of my favorite aspects of this figure. Very soft, very subtle, and actually really it's one of the charming factors I find the most of this figure. He's a very poseable figure, and yet the way he's colored and sculpted, it almost feels like a figure I would have found maybe years ago as a child. I don't mean to sound that certainly as a bad thing. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It looks almost like it has a vintage look to it, and a really nice job on Boss Fight Studios' part. The appeal of the Boss Fight Studio Little Prince is that he has modern articulation. But the charm of this figure, more importantly, is that while looking at the sculpt, the way they approach the paint on both him, the accessories, and the display stand, he actually feels like he's more of a vintage toy, something you would have found in an old antique toy store or in the back of someone's attic as a childhood memory toy. There's certain like an attachment I find to this particular design of the Little Prince. I'm glad to see that they actually based it from the original novelization design of the character rather than the animated series, even though I grew up really with both. I like the way that they've painted the figure. I know I've said that probably several times already in this review, but really painting in such the subtle way that they did really does lend well to the idea that the character, the figure, looks like a vintage toy. Not to mention as well, he comes with a special rose, the dome for the rose, the friend fox, and the display stand, all come together really nicely for a classic looking design of the Little Prince. A big thank you, though, to the folks over at Boss Fight Studio that provided this sample of the Little Prince. I certainly have enjoyed having a look at this guy. Did you grow up with the Little Prince, whether it be the book series, whether it be the animated series, or like myself with both? Let me know down below in the comments section. If you guys also are new to this channel and you're enjoying all the content you've been seeing as of late, make sure you hit this video, first of all, with a like. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. And make sure as well you're turning on those bell notifications so that you're getting those friendly reminders from YouTube as to when new videos are going to be popping up. Just an FYI, a 411 to you, the viewing audience. There will be, in fact, more Boss Fight Studio reviews lined up and coming your way. So as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.